He's trying to start a war with IBM.
Steve Jobs hated IBM. They were the villain in Apple's story. Apple was the company that represented friendly user design, creativity, and beautiful design. And they had a mission. It was to make computers accessible to everyone. IBM represented the cold corporate machine that was holding back the personal computer from the world. It was a battle of philosophies for Steve Jobs, epitomized by the now famous Super Bowl commercial 1984, inspired by George Orwell's dystopian novel. Apple seemed to always be at its best when they were the underdog, and every market that they entered, they disrupted. They were David taking down Goliath. However, at some point along the way, Apple became the thing Steve Jobs hated, a $2.5 trillion monopoly obsessed with maintaining its market dominance rather than promoting innovation and creativity. My name is Raf, and this is Failure in the Future. Apple's been in the news a lot lately for its anti-competitive practices, and policymakers are starting to close in on Apple. The European Union and the US Department of Justice have both launched antitrust lawsuits against Apple, and the things that they're accusing Apple of doing is pretty damning. Apple has a history of being heavy-handed about what it allows developers to do with iPhone apps, and its strict policies are being seen as ways to stifle and suppress competition. Because of Apple's policy that prevents third-party app stores, cloud gaming will never be in Apple's app store. A cloud gaming service like xCloud violates Apple's terms of service because Apple views each individual game as its own application, therefore making xCloud a third-party app store. The feud between Microsoft and Apple became this public dispute, and the dispute was resolved because Microsoft found a loophole that allows iOS users to access xCloud through Safari, which is still a terrible user experience. Imagine a native xCloud iOS app that integrates with iMessage, where you can send your Call of Duty lobby to the group chat with your friends, and your friends can just hop on and play with you. Unfortunately, we're never going to be able to get an experience like that because of Apple's policy. Speaking of iMessage, Apple purposely makes messaging Android users from an iPhone god-awful. The entire telecommunication industry has moved on to a new messaging standard called RCS, which would make messaging Android users not suck. However, Apple has deliberately held off on upgrading its messaging app because it's good for business that iPhone users shun Android users from the group chat. Pretty terrible. Apple also doesn't allow competitors to make rival wallets. One of the things that's holding cryptocurrencies back from the mainstream is that it's very difficult to do useful things like buying something from a store. If Apple allowed third-party wallets, a company like Coinbase could make a wallet that would allow you to pay for your Starbucks using Bitcoin through the iPhone's NFC technology. Or when you travel to another country, you wouldn't have to worry about exchanging the US dollar to the local currency. Instead, you'd be able to just use a digital wallet that handles the currency exchange free of charge. However, once again, we will never have these types of product experiences because of Apple's policies. For every dollar a developer makes through their iPhone app, Apple gets to keep 30% of the revenue. Imagine you were a small business and you wanted to open up a store in a mall, and that mall says, for you to open up here, we will be taking 30% of your revenue for life. You would think to yourself, this mall is run by the mob. And in Apple's case, it creates a weird dynamic with its competitors. For example, Spotify is a direct competitor of Apple Music. However, because of the Apple tax, Spotify has to charge more in order to maintain the same margin as Apple Music. And not only that, Apple gets the double dip where they get to keep the full profit of Apple Music and the 30% of their competitors' revenue. Going back to the mall analogy, that's like saying they're going to take 30% of your revenue and then open up a competing store right next door where they sell the same exact products, but they sell it for 30% less than what you charge. Pretty crazy when you think about it, right? Now, by far, the worst thing that Apple does is they try to conceal their shady business practices by saying they're trying to preserve your privacy. One of Apple's most impactful changes was when they rolled out the app transparency tracking feature as part of iOS 14. This is the feature that asks a user if they want an app to stop tracking them. This destroyed the ad market, which is the primary monetization strategy for companies like Meta and smaller tech firms like Pinterest, Snapchat, and independent game developers. Sure, many people were happy to see Meta temporarily suffer, but a tech giant like Meta has the resources to work around a change like this, and now their stock is at all-time highs. The smaller tech firms are the ones that suffered the most from this change, and they've never been able to recover from it because they don't have the resources that Meta does. Now, where things get shady with Apple is when they launch their own advertising products. By killing its competitors' ad business, Apple created a market that only it can fulfill. Apple's ads will be the best performing ads on iOS because they're the only ones that have access to your data. The conflict of interest here is astounding. All this to say that Apple's been focusing on the wrong things for the last decade. Rather than focusing on innovating and creating the best technology products, they focused on making the walls of their ecosystem taller. For this reason, smartphones have become a lot less exciting in recent years, and that's why iPhone sales are declining. Technology is a lot more exciting when everybody's collaborating and competing fairly to drive innovation forward. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to follow along to see how things play out with the monopoly lawsuit against Apple. Thank you for watching. My name is Raf, and this is Failure in Future. I'll see you in the next one.